What do you define as racism?
I think racism is the systematic prejudice against people of colour who have faced barriers placed on them by majority groups for generations.
Racism to me is using prejudice to is having prejudices against people, and using stereotypes and misaligned perspectives against a person.
I think there's this conception that racism is just between two individuals, but it actually goes beyond that because there's historical and legal context that contributes to it.
Ferdinand, Paradis and Kelleher identify racism as holding elements of discrimination on both individual and institutional levels.
White people quite often misunderstand what racism is, you feel?
Yeah, I think so. I think the most common form of racism is in like microaggressions and like subtle attitudes and prejudice that people might not completely realize they are committing.
So, would you say that you've experienced racism?
I think I would say I would have, yes. Definitely, like even if just with my casual job or being like my existence as an immigrant, if you will. Yeah.
Hearing kind of views that were kind of expressed from some of my cohort was really alarming, because it was like, I just didn't think that anyone still thought like that or acted like that. So many things seemed to be based on stereotypes still, which I thought were kind of gone with. I can absolutely recall times when someone was perfectly pleasant and nice to me and helpful, and then they find out I'm Indigenous and their entire way of treating me completely changes.
Majority of the time, when people say it to me, it's like they say it like it's a compliment to me. Like they're like, "Oh, what's up, Mai?" And I'm like, "Yo, don't do that."
By saying that, I'm quite privileged in the sense that I do have quite light skin and I can be white passing at times. So I want to acknowledge that, and I feel like for that reason I haven't had as many acts of racism put on me. And the main acts of racism is at work. I actually haven't had racism in any other setting, like social settings, because the friends I surround myself with are so loving and supportive, and they're pretty much all POC. But when I go into my work environment, obviously there's all different types of races, and it's always the white patients that just always make comments that are unnecessary, like, "Oh my gosh, when did you come to Australia?" It makes me feel like I'm not the norm and I'm outside of the norm.
When I was little, because I'm half white, I was bullied as a kid in primary school, and I hated being Filipino, and like totally was like rejected that and was like, that's not a part of me at all, because I would get bullied for like bringing rice and Filipino food to school. I was really little. I was in like year one, I think, probably when it started. I didn't understand it and I was really confused. I remember like going home to my parents and being like, "Why are people calling me that? I don't understand that."
But would you say that your experiences differ from that of your parents?
100%, yeah.
In my dad's generation and my mum's generation, I think the racism was very overt. Racism now is harder to combat because a lot of the ways that I'm impacted by racism is not as much about someone insulting me or calling me a name, but much more in like the effects of having structures in place that weren't built for me or don't have space for me. So it's almost like via exclusion, you're being impacted by racism rather than someone directly trying to insult you or pick on your difference.
Yes, because my parents came here as migrants, and they were automatically alienated because of their lack of English at the time. and even now their accent sort of keeps them, it stops them from really integrating into society properly.
And I think, but I do think a lot of it is based off appearance, and my mum wears a hijab, so I feel like that, like very physical and, kind of in your face, for some people, like a symbol of being Middle Eastern or Muslim, that would very much change how people act and react and, the bounds of their racism, I guess.
Many times now as an adult, I will call it out as it is, whether it's happening to me or someone else. Even if it's like a microaggression, I will oftentimes call it out and say, hey, that's not okay to say that. Did you understand how that came across? A lot of the times I get the response like, oh, I didn't mean it. I was just making a joke. That's not how I meant it as. And then I try and explain it. How it comes across, and it doesn't usually get through to the person who said it.
I wish that I could say I confront it sort of from an academic perspective, but generally it's just frustration and like, what the fuck is wrong with you kind of thing. I wish in the moments that I could like calm down how upset I was and then have a more academic conversation, but it also depends on the moment. If someone's like exhibiting or looking like they're going to exhibit some kind of violence, or the situation is going to be heightened in some ways, that's kind of like a but if it's a friend or an acquaintance or someone that I can see is open to having a more academic conversation, then I'll just approach it like that.
Maybe I should get better at dealing with it. Maybe I should call them out, but I feel like if you make people uncomfortable, then that's how they learn. Yeah, rather than giving people a lecture. If you're the only person of color and there are 10 white people around you all singing Kanye West, yelling out the N-word, what am I supposed to do? Like, if I say anything, and I have said things in the past, then it's, oh, you don't get it because you're not Australian. Oh, it's just Australian culture, Uri. It's just a joke. It's just banter. Okay, like, is it really? But yeah. So it really minimizes. It makes me feel very minimized and very misunderstood and unheard. Yeah.
Yes, I think more in the way of I've been around people who have, made racist jokes or kind of underlying comments that are definitely based off racist stereotypes. And I think I've gotten a bit practiced here about like just calling those out, and I always tend to do it in a more like joking way, like, don't snap into immediate seriousness. Although sometimes I'd like to, but I am always wary of that, like, do they know it's not okay to make jokes like that? And then kind of see what the reaction is from there. So it's definitely been about the more like subconscious racism that I've seen rather than, a racist act.
I feel like you're a little bit afraid of being ostracized if you call it out more expressly.
Yeah, like sadly, I think the first reaction of a lot of us isn't just to be like, that was racist, don't say that. It's to kind of, like ease into it and just call them out, which I think sometimes can be a good thing, but I think sometimes it definitely does need that harsher approach. So I think it's kind of practice in terms of learning, when to explicitly call it out and make sure they know it's not okay.
Australian racism is serious, deadly, making you experience claustrophobia, misery, and yet you can't put a finger on just what is happening to you. Or you can, but you find yourself unable to point to it publicly for fear of ridicule.